Wonderful memories we have from the land of the Maya jazz cruise in Caribbean waters in January 1995. We saw Mexico, Belize, Guatemala, and Honduras. We shopped and snorkeled, saw beautiful scenery, ate lots of good food, and heard 3 great jazz bands play. This 10-minute segment shows more than 100 color photos to preview the videotape memories that follow. The adventure began in Cozumel, the famous Mexican resort, where we had some time to see the plaza downtown. There were many shops where interesting souvenirs were sold, and some restaurants, one of which we visited for some liquid refreshment. The music in the background, by the way, is by the Fulton Street Jazz Band. Down at the beach, we saw resort hotels, and there were the thatched roofs of an outdoor cafe. In the background here is the Regent Spirit, which was to be our home for the next 7 days. An early activity on board was a life jacket drill. Luckily, we never had to use them. Pulling away from the ship at Belize, we headed out to a snorkeling adventure on a tiny, uninhabited island. The waters were pretty smooth that day, and the cruisers enjoyed a trip with the wind and the spray in their faces. We stopped for a photo, and this is yours truly and his beautiful wife. And then we had snorkeling instructions, and then we enjoyed the beautiful reefs and tropical fish at the island of Goff's Cay. Then we went to the city of Belize City, and we had about an hour to walk through the streets, and it had some attractive dwellings. And a very pretty little river that runs to the sea under a downtown bridge. And there were some houses that were very much in need of rehabilitation. One bulletin board offered a health message. Beautiful coleus and other flowers were found as we got back toward the dock to catch our tender back to the ship. And there also was a friendly bar. Beautiful skies welcomed us to Guatemala, where we visited the picturesque town of Santo Tomas de Castilla. The animals roam the streets, right along with the people and vehicles there. Many cruisers found bargains at the marketplace, where arts and crafts and bright-colored textiles and clothing are displayed.
Leather belts, silver items.
Some tips on what to buy and how to wear it were given by a tour leader. Mayan Indian families come down from the hills to sell their goods when cruise ships are in town. We admired the beauty of the Mayan people, and we filled up a suitcase of beautiful items bought here and had to take extra luggage back home. A gorgeous sunset at sea was matched perhaps by the Honduran island of Roatan, where we took a bus to the Fantasy Island Resort. This is a great place to loaf in a hammock under friendly palm trees. Clear waters, tropical fish, and a sandy beach were very much enjoyed. Native singers and conga drummers and young dancers also entertained us. Other attractions near the beach included boats in a nearby marina, and kayakers, and a windsurfer in the little bay by the beach. A long bus ride then took us to Copan to see the magnificent Mayan ruins that are also shown on Honduran currency. We were greeted by this colorful bird at the entrance. It was friendly also. Our tour guide explained the significance of this site, which is called the Paris of the New World for its artistic structures and carvings. Reconstruction has been going on for decades, and many items are yet to be displayed in what can only guess were original locations. Here is a carving of a god overlooking a plaza, and here is the ball field as seen from above. Copan ruins include a hieroglyphic staircase that dates back to the 8th century and carvings of gods and animals. The shorter structures are altars, and the taller columns with carvings are stelae. There was also a playful coatimundi who romped among the tourists. Some close-ups of the art are shown here in pairs of vertical structures. We will not soon forget this visit to the archaeological past of the amazing Mayans. Food displays on the Regent Spirit also were wonderfully artistic. Faces and animals and flowers were carved from watermelons and various fruits and vegetables, almost looking too good to eat. Here are flowers carved from onions. An ice sculpture was displayed along with a bird on a watermelon. The artist, a chef from the Philippines, demonstrated his creations so cruisers could learn how to do them also. I might call him the Picasso of pineapples. But I wonder how many of us can equal this culinary artistry. The ship couldn't dock at Cancun because of heavy seas, so we stayed at Playa del Carmen on Saturday instead. This is a clean and beautiful town with nice restaurants and shops full of arts and crafts. We got to interview a couple of the shop owners there, and it was a very enjoyable stop, and we'd like to go back. At evening by the beach, we enjoyed an outdoor cafe. And there was surfboard art in the sand. And here you'll see the Regent Spirit on the background. And there is yet one more of those wonderful Caribbean sunsets awaiting before our cruise finally comes to an end. As musicians say after a great session, man, wasn't that a gas? Our 2-week tour in Australia took us to 5 cities: the Barrier Reef, Blue Mountains, and Rainforest. Musical delights were provided by the natural gas and Australian players. Here's a montage in living black and white of players with whom we toured. And there's Bob and Warren and Phil and Carl, Ed, Pete, and Dave. We didn't know much about wombats before this, but we call this the Wombat Tour, and we learned about a hot wombat band. This artwork is from a calendar, and it was provided by the band leader, Kevin Keel. Our group gathered for a picture at a point across from the famous Sydney Opera House. And after this, you'll see a sequence of 164 photos taken on the tour. Music by the Natural Gas Jazz Band is in the background. Our Qantas flight crossed the date line, and we arrived at the Ibis Hotel in Sydney late on June 29th. After the first of many great breakfasts, we got on a bus to see the city. Our first stop was at Mrs. Macquarie's Point, and we had wonderful views of the famous Sydney Opera House, the Harbour Bridge, and the skyline of this clean and modern city. An art museum and cathedral were seen along the bus route. We arrived at Sydney Cove, admired the sailing boats, and we saw the Opera House again as we cruised the harbor on a paddle wheel boat. Downtown buildings, mansions on the waterfront, other boats passing by, and a lighthouse were among the sights. New views of the Opera House were offered as we cruised under the Harbor Bridge, and then we came back to shore. The views of Sydney from the Centre Point Tower were breathtaking. It's the tallest structure in the southern hemisphere. It was only a short walk from downtown Sydney back to the hotel, and we enjoyed watching the monorail trains rounding a bend at Darling Harbour. Natural Gas played 4 times in the Sydney area. We also heard the Zenith Jazz Band, and Natural Gas members posed with the legendary Graham Bell. Beautiful stained glass, an animated clock tower exhibit, and carriage of pure jade were among the attractions in the Queen Victoria building. Walking back to the hotel, we saw these bird sculptures near the monorail bridge. Seagulls and Chinese sculpture greeted us at the Darling Harbour entertainment area. Its big music festival lasted 2 months. We heard a marching band, a youth swing band, and blues singer, Margie Baker. Spirits were elevated as we went to the Blue Mountains, and we saw the Three Sisters formation and some beautiful parrots and other birds at a feeder. The Katoomba Railway is the steepest in the world, and we enjoyed the ride. We also saw a waterfall and a walk in the woods. And the Three Sisters Fountain. we finally saw our first wombat at the wildlife park, as well as koalas, kangaroos, and wallabies. The animals were rather calm that day. Maybe they needed some music by the band to perk them up. A crocodile also was sunning by a small pond, and a shark sculpture reminded us of Jaws. Bernie, Phil, and David posed near the bus, and then we headed to Canberra, where hungry pelicans greeted us, and we also toured the Parliament building. We saw pictures of Queen Elizabeth and other notables, the famous tapestry. And then we drove around town and saw these artwork and a tall monument, and toured the huge War Memorial building, which was filled with exhibits. We stopped downtown for lunch, and then it was back to the Ibis Hotel at Sydney, where we admired its sandstone walls. We stayed one night at the Ocean Blue Resort at Surfer's Paradise, and we admired the flowers and the birds and the ocean on a stroll around town. This is a big tourist area with high-rise condominiums and hotels. Kevin Q and Jim Mills played intermissions at a Gold Coast Society concert. Pete and Carl and Ed and Dave are also seen here. A river cruise in the Gold Coast area was enjoyed by our group. And a bungee jump was among the sights. Then in downtown Surfer's Paradise, we saw everything from the Condom Kingdom to T-Shirt City and other shops. Sandstone art caught our attention near the ocean. And this fountain sculpture and sheep and koala souvenirs downtown. We also had a one-night stand at Brisbane, where we saw this bridge and natural colored stone at a mountainside overlook. At the Brisbane Jazz Club, drummer Warren Perry met 11 of his Australian cousins. We settled in for 4 days at the beautiful Colonial Club Resort at Cairns. And the restaurants and shops at the pier were very appealing. A train took us through the rainforest to Karanda, where we heard the Jabugai dancers. The market here was outstanding. We also saw big fruit bats in nearby trees. Most of us got back on the bus loaded with packages from the shops in this location. The Quicksilver jet boat took us to the outer edge of the Barrier Reef, and we enjoyed socializing on board. We saw a few fish and lots of coral from the observation deck and in a glass-sided semi-submersible boat. The bluish color here comes from the glass in the water. Some people also learned to scuba dive at the reef pontoon. We watched the wake from the boat jets and enjoyed a marvelous sunset as we turned to Cairns in the evening. The band played 2 concerts at Cairns, and Aussie musicians joined in a jam session at the resort. These photos are from that event, and some will be used with my article in the Mississippi Rag. Our final cruise took us to Green Island on the inner Barrier Reef. We took a walk in the woods and on the path along the shore. The coral was very visible from the glass-bottom boat, and the fish had a feeding frenzy when the food was tossed onto the water. Back at the Colonial Club Resort, we enjoyed the beautiful lionfish and the others in the aquarium there. We took a last look at the poolside patio before leaving home on July 12th. We crossed the date line again, so also got home on July 12th. Yours truly, Ruth Byler and Bob Byler, enjoyed this great tour and hope you like these pictures and the videotapes that follow. Scandinavia with the 45 adventurers was a wonderful experience in September 1996. About 20 also went to St. Petersburg, Russia, and were delighted with that city. About 1,000 scenes are edited from 18 hours of videotape for this production. We try to show important activity and keep the action going to hold your interest. Background music is from Peer Gynt by famous Norwegian composer Edvard Grieg. We'll look first at more than 200 photos from the tour, and video will follow. The word that seems to describe St. Petersburg best is monumental. Mile after mile of enormous museums, palaces, and other buildings greeted our eyes. We were especially dazzled by the golden statues at the famous Peterhof Palace, about 200 of them. And then by many rooms full of art in the huge Hermitage Museum. This is the museum and the square nearby. Statues of military leaders on horses were everywhere, as well as sculptures standing alone and on columns, and doors and walls. Russian nesting dolls were a popular souvenir item. The magnificent domes of the Church of Our Savior will remain in our memory forever. We were entranced by the ballet dancers at the Alexandrinsky Theater. This is one of 3 musical performances we heard in the city, which is rich in culture. We crossed the Neva River several times and also walked around the area near the Nevsky Palace. This was during our last day in St. Petersburg. On the way to the airport, we were able to visit the Russian War Memorial and admire the statuary there. There's a memorial commemorating World War II. Our first stop off the bus in Helsinki was in a square with a large church nearby and statues in the center. Boats on the waterfront, and then more statues, and towering church spires loomed in our view. A church near our hotel is now a museum. This art is in the area near the market. These unusual metallic sculptures honor the great composer Sibelius. Finland lost many of its young men during the war, and we saw their graves at a memorial cemetery. A church built in massive rocks is another tourist attraction. The group also toured the former studio and home of architect Eero Saarinen. It was a rainy night when we walked around downtown, and we saw some interesting figures and shops in a huge underground mall. Then from the top of our hotel, we saw Helsinki at sunset. The beautiful Little Mermaid greeted us by the sea at Copenhagen. We saw more towering buildings, soaring fountains, historic churches, and guards on the alert as we toured the city. City Hall Square is a focal point of many activities downtown. We heard street music in the square and along the Strogat, where we strolled along to see the shops. Then we enjoyed the boats on the canal and refreshments, of course, in the open air at Nyhavn. We went to the Tivoli Park to dine with our friendly tour group, also heard a famous jazz band, and admired the fountains and its buildings at night. This is the Giffian fountain, which we thought was beautiful, as well as a historic St. Albans church nearby. Walking on, we saw more art, including a dragon's head at a restaurant. This psychedelic art is on buildings in Christiania, a community where people smoke hash openly and defy government control. North of Copenhagen, we saw the castle that inspired Shakespeare when he wrote Hamlet. Then the bus took us to Frederiksborg Castle, which is spectacular at the least. We admired gilded ornamentation, beautiful stained glass, and classic paintings on the walls and on the ceilings. As well as porcelains. The golden adornments of this ceiling amazed us all. This big ferry then took us overnight to Oslo. Our tour at Oslo included a park filled with Gustav Vigeland statues. These portray people of all ages to illustrate a theme termed the circle of life. It is a stunning display that has a powerful impact on viewers. The fountains also incorporate more sculptures. A variety of landscape and human art was shown at the State Museum. Then we took a leisurely walk around the city. Unusual sculptures, the expected troll, and a unique circular fountain were seen. More palatial buildings were seen on several streets not far from downtown. And we explored a hilltop fortress where Norwegians fought off the Nazis. And then had a final view of the Oslo waterfront. The Norway countryside offers an endless series of picture postcards. On the bus from Oslo to Ulvik, we viewed a glacier and lake, as well as roads with snow sticks to guide winter drivers. Large rocks are thrown from hillsides by trolls, according to Norwegian folklore. Aerial views of the glacier and mountains were seen from a seaplane operated from the Brakenes Hotel in Ulvik, which is seen here. Many mirror image views of shoreside houses were captured, as we continued our sightseeing by boat, bus, train, and plane. At Utney, we saw ancient houses with sod roofs and historical displays at the Hardanger Museum. Some kids were picking berries on the hillside, which had a marvelous view of the lake. A sculpture of logs and bricks called Stream's Nest was seen before we began climbing the hairpin turns to the top of Osa Mountain. What a view we had from there. This was part of our wilderness tour. On the road in the morning, we had a shopping stop at Voss, where the fog hung over the water and hillside. Then we were on the water again on Sonja Fjord, the longest and deepest fjord in Norway. We had lunch at Flom, and then took its famous train up the mountains and through many tunnels. Views along the way included a valley far below and a waterfall where we stopped. We switched to another train to go into Bergen. Varicolored waterfront buildings and historic stone churches were seen in a walking tour of Bergen. This troll guarded a store entrance. We took a funicular up a mountain to view the city below and then walk its wooded trails. Back down below, we saw a worm's eye view of tall buildings and a fountain that highlights a park in Bergen's central area. The outdoor market near our hotel was a popular shopping and gathering place. At sunset, we saw Johannes Church and the glistening faces of buildings by the waterfront. We flew to Stockholm and went by bus to its city hall, which also is an impressive museum. The group took a walk in Gamla Stan, the name for the Old Town section with its narrow streets. We also saw a statue of St. George and the Dragon. At the Vasa Museum, we saw a huge ship that was underwater for 333 years before it was raised and restored. A tour by boat went through canals and locks to offer new views of the city. It is built on 14 islands that are connected by bridges. On the way home, we saw Old Town again and bought some Swedish glass items. Going into the countryside, we saw more art at Skokloster Monastery. Then the ancient ruins and new church at Sigtuna. This is a picturesque town with interesting shops and a waterfront park. We went on to Uppsala to tour its tall cathedral. Its stained glass windows rise over the tombs of royalty. Nearby at the university, we found 6 ancient rune stones. The Vikings created these with coded messages, and they also are found in North America. Our tour concluded with a long flight from Helsinki to New York City, and we viewed glacier-covered mountains as we flew over Greenland.